Global Money Talk, one and all, brought to you by SamPro.TV. Greetings, of course, to all of our viewers from across the United States, Korea, and all around the world. We are welcoming you live from the trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange, right here in New York City, the financial capital of America. I'm JD Durkin, joining me today for our market briefing, and of course, to weigh in on all the top stories of the day, and there is no shortage of them, is our good friend Tai Wong. Tai is an independent proprietary trader. Tai, good morning.
Good morning, JD.
What a day, off and rolling here for the markets.
It's great to be here. I always like to start, it's National Chocolate Day today.
That's right, we were talking, that's a big deal.
That's a big deal. There's a lot, a lot of people love chocolate. We've actually seen cocoa prices jump up and around. But, I like chocolate. I'm a Kit Kat man, a Reese's peanut butter man. What kind of chocolate? Are you a chocolate man?
Anything with peanut butter and chocolate, appropriately so for Halloween around the corner.
That's right. End of the week. And I've been told that it's actually Hollow weekend. That's from my kids who still do that sort of thing. But,
right.
I'm probably a little old for that. Gotcha. I just leave some candy out and hopefully nobody bothers me.
That's fair.
But also today is Bill Gates' 69th birthday.
Huge.
And a remarkable man who dropped out of Harvard, 1975, and started a huge business. And whether you agree or disagree with him, right? And I looked this up because the man's still worth over $100 billion. This is after he had to give $75 billion away to his wife after they got divorced. And he's given $60 billion away already. So that man had like $250 billion. If he never he would be like probably the world's richest man right along Elon. So pretty remarkable, a happy birthday to quite a remarkable man.
Yeah, absolutely. And his company's doing pretty well here this year. It is up 15%. Of course, Microsoft, one of the many big splashy tech pro-growth names set to report quarterly earnings in the days ahead. He's trying to work it back into the earnings. Of course, it's earnings season, and appropriately so. We'll hear from Microsoft in the coming days. We'll hear from Apple. We'll hear from Alphabet, a handful of others. And you and I both know these names are so highly concentrated in the S&P 500, Tai, that oftentimes as a company like Microsoft moves, given its market cap, given its strength relative to the rest of the market, so too goes the market. So it's a really interesting week on the earnings front, at least. It's
probably you might argue it's the biggest earnings week because it's so many of these guys, as you mentioned, so many of the FANG guys are reporting that it's going to set the mood for the market. Now, mostly I think a lot of these numbers, I certainly wouldn't say massaged, but they're going to, put the best look on it. Who wouldn't, right? But nevertheless, if there's a surprise, positive or negative, that's going to make a big difference to the market. But today, I think I'm not sure what timing is. If it's after the close, we'll have Ford, and we'll see how their, how their numbers look. We had, I think we had a surprise with Stellantis a couple weeks back that didn't work out very well for them. So Ford to start the whole thing, but it's going to be a big week in earnings.
Under promise, over deliver. That's a good way. I like to describe earnings season that way because, of course, analysts don't want to be wrong to the down or on the high side, right? So they'd rather kind of set those expectations a little bit lower, and then suddenly these companies come out swinging, delivering at 4:15 p.m. and it's like, wow, what a beat. Who was expecting that? And then there's the difference between the reported number relative to the whispered number. But you're exactly right. We'll get Ford later on today. Other names to follow in the days ahead include JetBlue and McDonald's tomorrow. All these big tech names we're covering. And a lot of other really interesting names as well. We'll get Chevron and ExxonMobil, some of the oil giants, later on in the week as well. So if you love earnings, this is what you're here for. You're here for a week like this.
Absolutely. And actually, you bring up crude, and one of the things that happened over the weekend, the long-awaited Israeli retaliation on Iran. And, watching the politics around this was really remarkable because you could see the Biden administration. It didn't come out and literally say it, but it was like, do not cause any problems for us in a really tight election, a month out, 2 weeks out, 10 days out. And you could see that this strike on Iran, which the market knew had to come, was really a negotiation between the Biden administration, and the Israeli government. And also, I think early last week, there was a pretty bad leak that came out about sort of Israeli plans and how they were going to fly. They didn't detail the targets, but it was really, eye-opening in terms of the Israelis won't want to share too much data with us, given what actually came out. But the attack that happened on Saturday hit all military installations. Looks like it hit a lot of their missile-making facilities and their fuel facilities, so it may have a farther-ranging effect. But it didn't hit oil. It didn't hit any of the nuclear facilities. Certainly, a lot of people said, maybe this is a wasted opportunity to really strike back where it hurts. But I think the Israelis had to play it right, and you could see that crude back is off 5% so far this morning. From I think WTI is in the high 60s. It got up to almost 80 in the week after the Iranian attack on Israel, because people were so afraid that something would happen. If we can we look at graphic 2? And this is a 5-year chart on WTI, and I think there you go. And you know what? 5-year chart. This doesn't look very good. You look at this, is each candle is a week, and you can see we're very close to all the bottoms that we've seen over the past two and a half years. We know the supply picture isn't very good, so you could certainly see that we could probe a little lower, get out some longs, the stop loss down into the low 60s, and then see where we go. But it's not a very healthy chart, and the price action today is just a reaction to the Israeli attacks, which were relatively mild as far as certainly crude is concerned.
Yeah, and additionally, that drone that targeted the Israeli Prime Minister's home during those latest barrages back and forth with Hezbollah, and to your point, Brent and West Texas prices remaining negative, both for the year as well as compared to where they were 12 months ago. But I love taking that step back approach and being able to look at the week-by-week candlestick, because that tells a much more complete story than even tracking some of these numbers day to day.
Because, I'm not naturally a crude trader. I keep an eye on it, but I can't keep all the price action in my head. So that's why I always pop up the charts. And technology is so good now. TradingView, it's their chart. It's a free service. I love TradingView. It's a great service, real time. You can watch, max 10-year, 5-year, 1 year, and minute. And in fact, I often said on the show, when this big piece of data out, I don't even look for the data release. I just look for the minute chart in gold and watch it react, because it takes a couple seconds for my data to renew, and then it'll take me a second or two to just process it. The machines have done that for me. You can just see, as you can pick gold or pick something, or stock market futures, to see, based on their reaction, what the data was.
Absolutely. And of course, and it's not just some of those commodities that we're following, and it's not just earnings. We've got a lot of key pieces of economic data coming out in the days ahead. Absolutely. PCE inflation will be crossing the wire on Thursday. That is, without a doubt, the central bank's preferred gauge of inflation. It's that last big piece of the inflation puzzle, Tai, that we're going to get before next week's FOMC meeting. And as if all of that weren't enough, Remy and I were talking this morning about the October jobs report, which we get this Friday morning. This is the sort of stuff we love. These are the sort of weeks we are so thankful to have. Not just caffeine, but to your point, lots of pieces of candy. We're going to need that Halloween candy, I think, to keep us fueled and energized for all of the data we're going to get in the days ahead.
It was a quiet week data-wise last week, one of the most quiet weeks, usually before payrolls. But we also get jolts, which which I remember it came out and nobody paid attention to it. And then Jay Powell said, I like watching this, and everybody now pays attention to it.
We love job opening and labor turnover numbers. Yeah.
Right. So you get that, you get ADP, and then the payrolls report. But there's going to be a lot of sort of pollution in it from, I think, Boeing, from the Boeing strike, and the downstream part of the Boeing strike. All their suppliers who are, you're seeing layoffs of them because, and they get unemployment, though the strikers themselves are not eligible because they're striking for unemployment. But you also see the two big storms. So this number, there's probably going to be a fair amount of volatility around this number. Maybe people will look into average hourly earnings, or, as Danielle Booth, one of our guests over the past month, said, look at hourly hours worked. And she said that was really important, because as hours work continue to sink, that's a signal that business is slowing down, but they don't want to fire workers because it's expensive and then you might have to rehire them, but you give them less hours. So she's actually, I've never looked at hours worked that way, and it's at recent lows, so it was really pretty interesting. So market might even be looking at something away from the headline because of all the pollution from all the exogenous impacts that we've had so far this past month.
And of course, it always helps explain why the central bank looks at not just top line inflation prints and then an additional figure we call core, in this case, core PCE. You strip away some of those more volatile elements like energy, like food. These are the things that can be significantly disrupted, Tai, as we know, month to month because of things like extreme weather patterns, throwing off some of those numbers. But this is the big one for the central bank to head into next week. And I think the timing surrounding the U.S. election is fascinating. We got the election on Tuesday. If 2020 is any gauge, granted that was a pandemic-based election, more vote by mail than history tells us, but we could still be in. It could take us several days for the electoral dust to settle before we know who won, not just the presidency, but some of these down-ballot races as well. And then right in the middle of all of that, we're going to hear from Jerome Powell and his colleagues at the FOMC about the fate of interest rates, at least for this month, with one more meeting left to go in December.
Exactly as you say. Next week it's going to be after a lot of data this week. Next week the event risks, right? The feeling is general that we'll be able to know the fate of the Senate on Wednesday morning. Whether the Republicans are heavily expected to recapture control of the Senate with 2 seats in West Virginia and in West Virginia and Montana. Both pretty red states that had popular Democratic senators, but one resigned and the other one is well, he didn't resign. Joe Manchin of West Virginia retired, and John Tester's, and looks like he won't win this fight.
Sure.
So we'll probably go Republican, but the presidential race, we have no idea. It could easily be days, and then there's recounts, and I was actually looking at the betting markets, and I had to go through a friend because as Americans we can't actually bet on poly market and predict it. So I was asking a friend, I said, what are the odds right now? And he goes, it's plus 140 for Kamala, because I was looking to bet on Kamala for a number of different reasons. I think the odds may be enough that it might be worth a little bet. And I said, how do we settle this? And he goes, okay, because it's really important. Like, is it January 20th, 2025 who gets inaugurated? But it really is. So they said if one candidate concedes, is one way to do it. And I think if it was the December 6th date, if the votes are ratified. So even the betting agencies are being really careful because you need a benchmark to settle the trade. And then finally, the House of Representatives. Some people think that it could take as long as a week because there's some very closely contested House races in California and in New York, in sort of the blue, the redder parts of New York and the slightly pinkish parts of California, that they're both historically very slow counting states. So it could be a week before we know where the House of Representatives settles. So there's going to be a lot of volatility, I'd expect, in the markets next week.
I always remind people who have forgotten that the 2020 election, we did not know the rate of the state of the presidency until that Saturday morning. It took us that whole week. Again, we're not expecting that historic surge in mail-in voting because that was largely still held in the depths of the pandemic, but especially for a lot of these races are going to be very close. I love you bring up these betting markets. They're largely, in many capacity, a newly emerging phenomenon. They're basically these binary yes or no bets that you have, and a lot of the betting markets seem to favor former President Donald Trump, at least for the Electoral College. But when you have the conversation about the popular vote, it seems to be favoring Vice President Kamala Harris and a lot of Democrats in these Senate races. So those betting markets like a Cauchy or a predicted or a poly market seem to indicate that in a lot of these swing states, they're going to be siding, they say, voters might side with Donald Trump, and then when you get down ballot, start to hold a check on Trump's power in the form of now siding with the Democratic candidate in a lot of those Senate races. And we've got key Senate races in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Those are the big three.
Well, the one that is also interesting is exactly your example is Sherrod Brown in Ohio. And what's now become deep red Ohio. I mean, Trump is going to take that state probably by 8 points. So can Sherrod Brown survive Trump's coattails? So you're thinking, will people go to the polls and vote for Trump and then vote for Brown? And then the other case is Texas, where Ted Cruz is another close election. He'll probably win by 4 points because you're thinking, how many people in Texas are actually going to go, I'm going to vote for Trump and then I'm going to vote for Colin Red, right? Because I like them playing football. That doesn't seem quite as likely. But but your point is well taken. Is that how does he or she affect the down ballot races? And that's why I think plus 140 Kamala is probably not a bad bet. It's a smaller percentage, but it is not beyond the pale that we could see a blue wave. Because all that would take is Kamala winning, picking off Pennsylvania would make it very hard for Trump to. He'd have to probably take either Wisconsin or Michigan and Arizona and Nevada to be able to offset Pennsylvania. And then if she wins, she only needs 50 votes in the Senate because she owns the tiebreaker as well.
Right.
And the House is a toss-up, probably slightly Democratic leaning. So that's why I thought it was. Remember I spoke about it last week, that the chances of a blue wave, or blue sweep, I should say rather, is probably 20%. So I was looking to bet on Kamala plus 140. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? It's not a lot of money.
And everyone here in New York City who, of course, saw that really historic Trump rally at Madison Square Garden yesterday, as soon as you exited the Garden on 7th Avenue, Kalshi betting market prediction odds, they're up on every massive screen. So we're in this whole new ball game this year where at least a platform like Kalshi that has secured for now CFTC regulatory approval to allow these event contract platforms. They're driving much of the conversation. They insist they're going to be more predictive, more accurate than traditional polling. Elon Musk and many others have argued that because they say real money is on the line, but there's only one way to find out, and that's really to wait and see.
So they play the game and they have the votes, and I stayed the heck away from Madison Square Garden yesterday.
Hey, you're not alone. It was a madhouse throughout Midtown Manhattan, and we got the New York City Marathon coming up on Sunday, too. That's another day to avoid the city if you can. At this hour, we are following the major market indexes. They are up and to the right. It's a comparable story for the tech-heavy NASDAQ at the market site. That is up 0.6%. The S&P 500 is up 0.5%. And Dow Industrials up 0.8%. The strongest names in the Dow right now, 3M up 4% on the session. We're also seeing shares of Intel up and to the right, and McDonald's, after battling that controversy with regards to contaminants last week, that stock having a bit of a rebound, currently up 1.8%. So as we kick off this very uncertain week, investors, they're not really in wait-and-see mode. They're buying in. We're moving these indexes up.
I think there's a substantial amount of money that comes in almost on a daily basis in the markets. So it's going to go somewhere. So is it the S&P 500 or some sector ETF? If there's not a lot selling to push against it, I think you get the slow grinds up. And I love the fact that you mentioned McDonald's because they have earnings this week as well, and we want to see how much it was this quarter, really, they started the $5 meal deal. How much was that for traffic? How much was that for profit and revenue? So I think that's going to be actually an interesting report, because it says, does it say that McDonald's wants to get rid of it because it cuts in their profit margins, but can they, because things have gotten so expensive for consumers that they had seen a lot of foot traffic fall. If they get a big jump, they may have to hold on to these special deals where you see all the fast food places are Wendy's has it, Burger King has it, to just bring more bodies in.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll follow those earnings numbers very closely, especially the ones that move an index like the Dow. Let's turn our attention now to overseas. This is the headline, at least in the New York Times, quote, "A seismic election sends Asia's most stable democracy into chaos." Of course, we're talking about the election results out in Japan. Japan's ruling coalition losing its parliamentary majority in what is being described as a bit of a drubbing at Sunday's national election, raising a lot of uncertainty about what the new look government is actually going to look like as their own electoral dust settles. What are you tracking out of a story like that?
So Ishiba, who was elected in a little bit of an upset for the Liberal Democratic Party, which was run post-war Japan for every year, with the exception of about 4 or 5 years in between, in the early 1990s and I think around the financial crisis, or maybe just before. So the LDP has run this country for a long time, and most recently there was a slush fund scandal where politicians were taking money and lining their own pockets, and some senior politicians. So the Fumio Kishida had to resign, and they had an election. They brought in this older guy, Ishiba. They thought he was going to be kind of a dove, and now he turns out to be a little bit of a hawk. But one thing he did, as soon as he was elected, he called a snap election. And you never know about, I'm not an expert in Japanese politics per se, but maybe you want to consolidate your power a little bit before you call the snap election. He called a snap election, and he and his sister party, the Komito party, I should say his coalition party, lost the absolute majority that they had. So now they will probably form the next government, but they'll probably have to bring in a third party or some smaller guys to cobble together a majority that probably won't be very stable. So why is that really important for the markets? What's really important for the markets is the Bank of Japan has a policy meeting on Thursday. Initially, a month ago, people thought they were going to hike rates again, and that's when you saw dollar yen drop. But since that election for the new head of LDP and the new prime minister, or likely to be the prime minister, the yen has weakened dramatically. And this sort of problematic election makes it very likely that BOJ won't touch rates this Thursday, may or may not touch them in December. So the dollar has actually been rallying straight 4%, the dollar index, this whole month, and a weaker yen will help the dollar. Now, I think the dollar rally is running out of steam, but where dollar yen is trading it in the 150s or at 140 or at 160 actually matters to the rest of the market. A weak yen will get that funding trade, the yen carry trade, back on again. It will affect the dollar overall, which affects other markets. Generally, the dollar affects metals and other commodities quite strongly. Not so gold this year because gold is in a mad bull rally
it's been wild.
that I haven't seen in my career. But for the rest of the world, we need to look at the election because of the impact it has on yen, and now it's likely to keep the yen weak for the time being.
Yeah, and speaking of weak, if you've been an investor in a company like Boeing, that's probably been one of the words you've been using this year. The stock is down 38%, but a big news here out of this morning. The company, and this is the headline out of Yahoo Finance, Boeing launching $19 billion share sale in order to thwart a bit of a downgrade. Obviously, this has just been a controversy and scandal-plagued company. I mean, give me your thoughts on either the development here today or how you see a company like Boeing position itself, either with regards to the election or really just trying to get some of that momentum back here, Tai.
So I think that right now they're just trying to stanch the bleeding. The machinist turned down 4 years, 35% last week, the week before. But they said, we really want to, we want our pensions, our defined benefit pension back. You're not getting that back. Nobody wants to shoulder that kind of burden, an unknown amount of money that's required over the ensuing decade. So what Boeing is doing is a $19 billion raise, 15 in common equity, and then I think another $4 billion in bonds that are convertible to equity, to just give themselves more cash to cushion as long as this strike keeps on going, because it looks like if they don't want to give undefined benefit pensions, they've gotten everything else. This could go for a substantial amount of time, and Boeing, even though they're bleeding so much money, a credit downgrade won't affect them as much, except they get downgraded to junk status, and then I don't think they want that. And this share raise will probably help them push that off a little bit. So it's just trying to get some cash in while they can.
Investors trying to make heads or tails of the stock today. It's currently trading down fractionally. It was down bigger. It's recovering some of those losses. But again, a company that is down 38% year to date, only 15% over the course of the last 52 weeks. We'll certainly follow the Boeing story. We got a couple minutes left.
Yes.
We were talking politics. We're going to end the show with a bit of politics. I don't know how many people expected a presidential candidate to sit down for a 3-hour podcast interview, but that's what we got. Former President Trump and Joe Rogan making a lot of headlines. That's ahead of his MSG rally. Your thoughts on that whole thing? Literally the last thing I said on Friday on the show with Remy was,
he's supposed to go on Joe Rogan for 3 hours. I'm not sure that's a really good idea, because in 3 hours he can say a lot of dumb things. So I watched the highlights on YouTube because I didn't have 3 hours, and he didn't actually say anything that controversial. I mean, honestly, I'm kind of shocked, but you said you watched the whole thing. So, what did you think?
I had nothing better to do this weekend than to spend 3 hours and watch the whole thing. No, I was struck by just how non-newsy it was. And I actually think for a communicator in Donald Trump's style, that's a great format for him personally. He can go on, he could do the weaves as he likes to talk about. He oftentimes gets asked about one topic. He goes into 3 or 4 others, and then he tries to bring it down, and that's difficult to do in a 5 to 6 minute TV interview. So overall for the podcast, Rogan pushed him on things like election denialism and some of his more controversial policies. And then listening to Rogan's debrief after was very interesting. He says, look, I really haven't met Donald Trump very many times, but I was struck at just how normal and comfortable he was. He sat there without water or anything for 3 hours and just absolutely let it go. So I know the invite is still out to Vice President Harris about making a potential Joe Rogan interview work in the days between now and the election. I don't think that will end up coming together, but this is kind of the podcast election. This is the election where a lot of major candidates, they are kind of avoiding those more mainstream media platforms and opportunities. They're siding in with podcasters, trying to reach voters and viewers and listeners directly where they are. And in places like this, that's fans of these platforms.
I mean, it's a brilliant move for him because because Joe Rogan, I mean, he's got $300 million Spotify man, right? That's his contract. He is the biggest podcaster, I think, in the country. So a lot of people will listen to him. Can you sway a few people? You could figure those two have, sort of a little connection. Could you imagine Vice President Harris talking ad lib for 3 hours? I don't think Hercam would ever let her do that. So I think they're going to let this one pass. But that's a great summation, particularly about that sort of debrief at the end.
Absolutely. Tai Wong, great conversation as always. Nice to have you here.
Super to be here.
Folks, stick around. Coming up, our friend Remy Blair sat down with Young Kim. He's governor of Cheongji Province in South Korea. We'll be right back with more after this.